My name is Mavis Langley, and my grandson handed me my eviction notice on my 72nd birthday. You might actually regret missing out on this dramatic story. So before you sit down and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now let's begin. It was a quiet Monday. I'd made blueberry muffins because he used to love them as a boy. I even lit a little candle in mine more for tradition than celebration. There wasn't going to be any party. I didn't expect gifts or flowers, not at this age. But I thought maybe there'd be a hug, a thank you, a word. Instead, I got an envelope. He didn't even look me in the eye when he set it down. He just said, "You'll want to read that sooner rather than later." Nana. Nana. That word used to melt my heart. Now it scraped down my spine like ice. He left the kitchen before I'd even opened it. The candle burned down to the wax while my fingers fumbled with the glued flap. Inside was one sheet of thick white paper professionally printed, signed, and notarized. Notice of termination of tenancy. I blinked, reread it, thought maybe this was a mistake. Maybe he meant to send this to someone else. But no, my name was there spelled correctly, bold and final. They were giving me 60 days to leave the house I'd lived in for 40 years. The house where I'd raised him from a pink-cheeked toddler with jelly fingers to a lanky teenager who swore he'd never forget what I did for him. Apparently he had. The kitchen around me blurred. My chest tightened. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come yet. I just sat there staring at the paper, wondering how it could all unravel so fast. I had thought betrayal came in slamming doors and angry words. But this came printed on linen paper handed to me over a plate of muffins. Later that evening, he came home with that girl again. His girlfriend, the one with the high ponytail and the way of never quite looking at me when I spoke. She brushed past me in the hallway and laughed loudly about how it was time. Time for what? Time for me to disappear. He followed her upstairs without a word. I stood at the base of the staircase, fingers curled around the railing, wanting to scream. But I didn't. That was never my way. I just listened as their footsteps vanished into the master bedroom, the bedroom that used to be mine and my late husband's. Now it was hers. Everything felt unfamiliar. The wallpaper I chose, the floorboards he learned to crawl on. Even the scent in the air had changed from lavender and cedarwood to something sharp and synthetic. Was this really happening? Had I loved a child into power only for him to use that power against me? I slept on the couch that night, unable to go up the stairs. My bed, though still technically mine, no longer felt like it welcomed me. At 3 a.m., I got up and pulled an old photo album from the bookshelf, one of those heavy ones with plastic sleeves and curling corners. I turned page after page: his first steps, his missing teeth, his high school graduation, me always behind the camera, always cheering, always there. And now I was being shown the door. I flipped to the last photo I had printed us in the backyard 5 years ago. I was in my gardening apron, and he had his arms slung around my shoulder, grinning like he didn't have a care in the world. He wrote a caption underneath in his boyish scrawl. "Best Nana ever." I ran my finger across those words as if touch could take me back. But it didn't. Nothing could. The next morning, I made him breakfast. Old habits. The smell of eggs and toast always used to draw him out like clockwork. This time, only she came down. She took a bite, then said she didn't eat heavy carbs this early and tossed the plate in the sink without a second glance. When he came down, he didn't touch the food at all. He looked at me like I was already gone. "I hope you understand this is best for everyone," he said. Best for who? Certainly not for me. But I nodded anyway, because even betrayal doesn't deserve begging. I'd been strong for him once. I would be strong again, even if it meant losing everything I thought was home. The hardest part wasn't the notice. It was how casually he went about life afterward, like nothing had happened. 2 days after handing me my walking papers, James asked if I could move my knitting basket from the living room. "It kind of clashes with the new decor," he said, waving vaguely at the minimalist glass coffee table and sharp-edged furniture that looked like it came from a catalog and never meant to be touched. This room used to be cozy, filled with soft throws, sun-faded curtains, and the faint scent of lemon polish. Now it felt cold, sterile. Like me and my memories didn't belong anymore. I packed up the basket in silence. It wasn't just yarn. It held my quiet hours, my grief for my late husband, the baby blanket I never finished for James's own son, who, by the way, I'd only met once at a birthday party I wasn't even invited to until his mother made a fuss. James said it was just an oversight. I didn't argue, but I remembered. Every day the house whispered to me, the scratches on the kitchen table from when James carved his name with a spoon, the notch in the banister where I caught him sliding down when he was 7, the nail in the hallway where my husband's army portrait used to hang. Now all of it felt like evidence in a case I'd already lost. On the 4th morning, I found her in the garden. She had pulled out the lavender bushes I'd tended for 2 decades and planted succulents in clean rows like graves. When I asked why, she said it's more modern, less messy, less me. That's what she meant. When she turned to go inside, I noticed the silver wind chimes I'd bought on our trip to Vermont had been taken down. No sound, just silence. And in that silence, a realization hit me like thunder. They weren't just removing me from the house. They were erasing me from it. I went upstairs to my bedroom. The door was locked. I knocked once. Nothing. Twice. She opened it halfway, eyes narrowed. James said you'd be moving downstairs soon. He thought it'd be easier on your knees. I stared at her. I have no knee problems. No arthritis. I jog in the mornings. But I nodded. Of course I nodded, because everything about this was already decided without me. That night, I sat on the back porch wrapped in a shawl, watching the moon crawl across the sky like a slow farewell. I thought about running, just packing a bag and leaving without a word. But then I thought, why should I be the one to disappear? This was my home. I built this life. I raised him. When his parents left, when they decided that partying and disappearing into their own chaos was more important than their son, I stepped in. I saved him. And now he was saving space. By evicting the one person who never left, I pulled out my old notebook. The one I used to keep track of groceries, chores, favorite recipes. I turned to a blank page and began writing. Everything. Not just what was happening now, but all the years that came before. The scraped knees I kissed, the college applications I edited, the prom tux I paid for, the late-night talks about heartbreak, bullies, dreams. If they wanted to erase me from the house, I would engrave myself onto the page, word by word, memory by memory. When the pen dried out, I found another, and another, until the notebook grew fat with truth. They could lock doors, throw out furniture, paint over walls, but I would not go quietly. Not without being remembered. I flipped back to the first page and underlined the title I had scrawled without thinking. She Who Stayed. 3 days later, they brought in the real estate agent, a man with hair too perfect and shoes too shiny. He walked through the house like he already owned it, talking into his phone, making comments like, "This will be worth a fortune once we gut it. Good it." He said that right in front of me. I was folding laundry in the corner, invisible. He didn't say hello. Didn't ask who I was. Just spoke of me like I was an old rug worn sentimental, ready to be tossed. James followed him around like a puppy, nodding too fast, eyes lighting up at every dollar sign. The agent said the market was hot, and that the house, my house, would practically sell itself. And that's when I realized it already had. Because this wasn't a showing, it was a done deal. That night, I confronted James. He was sitting on the couch, scrolling on his phone like the world hadn't shifted on its axis. "Did you sell it already?" He glanced up casual. "Technically, it's not yours, Nana. You put it in my name after Grandpa passed. You said it was simpler that way." "Yes, I did. Because I trusted him. Because I never imagined the boy I'd held through the night during thunderstorms would weaponize my love into legal leverage. But I live here, James. This is my home." His expression didn't change. "You'll be better off in Glenwood Park. They have a nice courtyard. And staff who can check in on you. You'll be safer." Safe. This wasn't about safety. It was about space, control, erasure. And he knew it. I didn't sleep that night. I walked the house like a ghost, trailing my fingers along the banisters, touching picture frames, whispering to the walls. Then I stopped in front of the small oak cabinet in the hallway, the one no one ever opened anymore. Inside, tucked behind old birthday cards and sheet music, was a black binder. My husband's will? He had kept it updated always, every time we refinanced, every time we made changes to the house. James was the listed beneficiary, yes, but so was I. Co-owner, resident for life. There it was, plain as day. The next morning, I called an old friend Eleanor who once practiced family law before retiring. We met at the library a few blocks away where no one would recognize us. She read the will quietly, then looked up, her eyes wide. Mavis, they can't evict you. Not legally. A breath I didn't know I was holding escaped my lungs. But I gave him the deed. Yes, but the will overrides certain transfers, especially if there's a clause about residency, which there is. She smiled. A small, fierce smile. And suddenly so did I. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I sat in the park for a long while watching kids chase pigeons and parents sip coffee, wondering how many of them would one day become strangers to the people who raised them. I had spent so much time mourning the betrayal, I hadn't realized something important. I wasn't powerless. I was angry. And anger in the right hands was a tool. I got home just as the stager was unloading fake plants and minimalist artwork from her car. She smiled politely and asked if I was the housekeeper. I didn't correct her. Not yet. I just went inside, poured myself a cup of tea, and sat quietly while they moved around me. They were preparing a show, but they had no idea who was watching. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I opened my old laptop. It was slow, a little cranky, but like me, it still worked. I logged into my email, found the contact for my husband's attorney, Mr. Franklin. He was retired now, but his son Daniel had taken over the practice. I'd met Daniel at my husband's funeral. He'd shaken my hand gently, the way you do when you know someone's world just caved in. I typed, "Dear Daniel, I believe I'm being unlawfully removed from my home. I have the original will. There may be something you should see." He called me the next morning. He'd already read the scanned copy I sent. And what he said changed everything. "Mavis, there's a residency clause. Your late husband wrote it himself. It states, quote, 'My wife shall retain full and uninterrupted right to reside in the property located at 112 Harper Way for the duration of her natural life.'" That clause is ironclad. I nearly dropped the phone. So I wasn't wrong. My presence wasn't a favor. It was a right. I told Daniel I wanted to handle this quietly for now. He agreed. We would file an injunction if needed. But first he suggested I document everything. So I did. I took photos of the house before the staging, screenshots of texts. Even the page from James's calendar app I glimpsed once, highlighted with the words, "Close date, Friday." They were planning to have me gone by the end of the week. I went downstairs for tea and found James and his wife sitting at the table with a woman who looked like she stepped out of a courtroom. Drama, sleek bob-sharp nails, sharper eyes. She glanced at me and asked, "Is this the tenant?" James chuckled. "She's my grandmother." There was a long pause. Then the woman said, "Well, she'll need to be out before the walkthrough. Liability reasons." I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I just turned around and went back to my room. And there, with trembling hands, I took out the journal I'd been writing in. And I kept going. That night, I made dinner. For myself. Just one plate. James saw the casserole on the counter and asked, "Aren't you making any for us?" I smiled, took my plate, and walked upstairs. He called after me. "What's that about?" I didn't answer. He'd fed me silence for days. I figured it was time I returned the recipe. I started noticing little things. Boxes disappearing. Closet space emptying out. James's wife had even begun taking down some of the art I hung over the years. I found my wedding photo on the floor behind the armoire frame, cracked. They were packing up the past, the parts that didn't match their future. I put the photo on my nightstand. Cracked and all. On Wednesday, the buyers came for a final tour. A couple in their late 30s, both dressed in beige and wide smiles. They looked around, asked questions, nodded. Then the woman saw me on the porch. "Oh, is she a neighbor?" I stood up, walked over slowly, extended my hand. "My name is Mavis Langley. This is my home." Their smiles faltered. James appeared behind me, clearly flustered. "She's just visiting." "No," I cut him off, voice calm. "I've lived here since the foundation was poured. My husband built this house. My grandson grew up in it. And I'm not leaving." The woman's eyes darted to James, then back to me. The moment stretched long and uncomfortable. Then I smiled. Would you like some lemonade? They didn't stay for lemonade. The young couple left with tight smiles and mumbled thanks, and I watched them retreat to their sleek silver SUV, glancing back once more before they closed the doors. The woman seemed unsettled. The man looked annoyed. As they pulled away, I could feel the tension lingering behind them, like the trail of their car exhaust. James didn't say a word. He just stared at me. His face was unreadable, but something had shifted. I wasn't the passive, docile grandmother anymore. I had spoken, and worse, I had been heard. Later that night, James came into my room without knocking. He stood at the door, arms folded. What was that? I was introducing myself to the people who think they're buying my house. He exhaled through his nose like a dragon just barely holding its fire. You embarrassed me. You scared them off. I didn't flinch. Good. You don't understand. We need this sale. Emily and I, we've made plans. Commitments. This house is mine, I said quietly. I'm not moving out. You gave it to me. I trusted you. There it was. The crack. He hesitated. His jaw tensed. And then, like every coward I've ever met, he chose retreat. He walked out. The next day, I received an envelope on my nightstand. No return address. Just my name in James's handwriting. Inside, a formal notice to vacate. I read it 3 times, my hand steady. It wasn't legal. It was intimidation. I tucked it into a folder with the others, emails, texts, photos, even a voice memo of Emily joking to her friend on speakerphone about how I don't even use half the house anyway. I had been documenting everything. Now I started curating it, building a case. Eleanor, my friend from the library, called me that afternoon. She sounded excited. Did you check your mailbox today? No. Why? There's something coming from the county. It's a formal pause on any property transfer until your occupancy status is clarified. Daniel filed the motion. I blinked. You mean they can't sell? They can't even show it anymore, she said. For now it's yours. I sat down at the kitchen table and let that sink in. The silence felt like victory, small, but hard-won. That evening, I watched James pacing in the backyard, phone to his ear. He was yelling. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. Should have been done already. No, I didn't think she'd fight it. No, I don't know what she has. She's just a grandma. The word hit me like a slap. Just a grandma. Like that made me less than. Like years of sacrifice and sleepless nights and picking up the pieces when his parents left didn't count. I wasn't just anything. I was the reason he had a home to sell. The next morning, I baked blueberry muffins. It might sound odd after everything, but I needed the scent, the comfort, something to remind me of before lawyers and lies, before betrayal bloomed in my living room like a weed. As they cooled, I sat on the porch flipping through the scrapbook I kept for James when he was little. His first haircut. The card he made for me in 3rd grade that read, "My Nana is magic." And maybe that was the worst of it. Not the legal betrayal, but the emotional one. The erasure of every quiet act of love. A neighbor stopped by while I was still outside. Mrs. Kravitz, always curious, always kind. I heard something about your house going up for sale, she said gently. I smiled. Not anymore. She tilted her head. Good. And just like that, I felt less alone. Word travels fast in neighborhoods. So do stories. And the one they would hear now would be mine. The first real sign that James was unraveling came 2 days later. I found him in the garage, standing in front of the old workbench that had once belonged to my husband. His shoulders were hunched, his phone clenched in one hand, a screwdriver in the other, pointless, angry tools for a man trying to fix a mess he'd made with words, not wires. He didn't look at me when I walked in. Instead, he muttered, "You're ruining everything." "I'm protecting what's mine," I said. He slammed the screwdriver down on the bench. "You were supposed to trust me." "I did," I replied quietly. "That was my mistake." I started spending more time outside. The late spring air helped clear my thoughts, and the birds didn't ask questions, they just sang. Every morning, I took my coffee to the front steps, sat wrapped in a shawl, and watched the street. It felt like claiming space again. The neighbors started waving. Some stopped to chat. And whether they knew it or not, they were witnessing something. A woman refusing to disappear. That week, I returned to the library. I hadn't gone back since the confrontation. Eleanor greeted me with a hug, and we sat in our usual corner by the window. She had a manila envelope for me. Daniel had sent more documents. The deed, the clause from the will, and copies of the cease and desist his office had sent to the real estate agency. James, it turned out, had forged my signature on a seller's disclosure form. A felony. Daniel wasn't pressing charges yet. He was giving James time to walk it back. At home, things had become colder. Emily no longer made eye contact. James hardly spoke. They cooked their own meals now and ate in silence, often leaving the dirty dishes in the sink, like some passive-aggressive offering to guilt. But guilt only works when it meets someone still trying to please. I had stopped. I began writing again. Not just in the journal I kept hidden in my drawer, but openly on a battered yellow legal pad at the kitchen table. A memoir, maybe? Or a letter to the future. To women like me, women who gave everything and were asked to give more. Who were told, "You've had your turn." Then came the email. It was from Emily, not James. It was short, cold. "This living situation is no longer sustainable. We're giving you until the end of the month to relocate. We'll cover the cost of a small apartment for 6 months. After that, you're on your own. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." She didn't sign it. I didn't respond. Instead, I printed it, added it to the folder. That evening, I cooked dinner again, just for myself. And I set a second plate across from me. For my husband, I lit a candle. I needed to feel him there, to remind myself that I wasn't crazy for loving a place so deeply I would fight for it. He had built it with calloused hands and blueprints sketched on napkins. We'd laughed in every corner. We'd cried by the fireplace. We'd buried our dog in the backyard under the maple tree and planted daffodils every spring. This house wasn't just wood and stone. It was my memory palace. And I would not be exiled from my own life. The next day, I saw the couple again, the potential buyers. They were parked down the street. They didn't come up this time. Just sat in their car for a while, watching, maybe wondering, maybe realizing they didn't want to be part of this mess. Or maybe just recognizing that a house with a living heart still beating inside wasn't ready to be turned into profit. Either way, they drove away again. And I went inside and kept writing. I had the dream again. The one where I'm standing in the middle of the kitchen, but it's not a kitchen anymore. The counters are gone. The floors stripped. The photos removed from the fridge. Every window blacked out. And James, he's walking through the house, clipboard in hand, pointing at walls and muttering numbers. Price tags. Renovation costs. Then he looks at me and says, "You're the last thing I need to clear out." I always wake up before I can speak. But that morning, I didn't feel fear. I felt resolve. At breakfast, I told James I'd like to meet with him and Emily after dinner. Just a conversation. He blinked at me, suspicious. "You're not recording this or something, are you?" I smiled. "Why? Is there something you don't want heard?" He didn't answer, but he agreed. That evening, I baked apple crisp. The scent filled the house the way memories do, suddenly, thoroughly, without asking permission. They came into the kitchen like guests instead of hosts. Emily with her arms crossed. James trying to look disinterested. I served dessert, sat down, and I began. "You've both made yourselves very clear, but here's what you may not have considered," I said. "I'm not just someone you can shuffle aside. I'm the woman who raised your son when your world was falling apart. I'm the one who paid the mortgage when your father left you with nothing but credit card bills and excuses." I slid a folder across the table. The one I'd been building, text messages, the fake listing, the forged signature, Emily's email. "I've documented everything." Emily stiffened. "Are you threatening us?" "No," I said softly. "I'm protecting myself." James opened the folder. I watched his expression shift. First confusion, then realization, then something dangerously close to shame. "You had this all along. I trusted you." Until I didn't. He closed the folder. "What do you want?" I leaned forward. "I want you to move out." Silence. Then laughter. Emily's bitter, mocking laugh. "That's rich." "I've spoken to Daniel," I continued. "He's willing to pursue legal action. Or we can do this quietly. You walk away. I keep the house. We call it even. You can't afford it on your own. James snapped. You're right. But I've been working with a local women's housing co-op. They're offering me a reverse mortgage agreement. It's not perfect, but it's mine. And it keeps this roof over my head. Emily scoffed. You're bluffing. I'm not. I stood. Take the weekend. Pack your things. Or I go to court on Monday. They didn't speak to me after that. But I saw them whispering, packing, arguing. Something in them knew the game had changed. I wasn't the defenseless grandmother anymore. I was a woman reclaiming her ground. On Sunday afternoon, I went for a walk through the neighborhood. Mrs. Kravitz waved from her garden. 2 houses down, the Mitchell twins were riding their bikes. And for the first time in weeks, the sun felt warm. Not in the weather sense. In the home sense, I had fought for something that mattered. I had found my voice again. And I wasn't done. By Monday morning, their car was gone. No goodbye. No note. Just the garage door left slightly ajar, as if to say we were never here. But I knew better. They had carved holes in the walls of my heart. Still, I had survived them. I walked through the house in silence. Each room whispered back to me, relieved, grateful, familiar. I opened all the windows. Let the breeze in. Let the ghosts out. Later that week, I met Daniel at his office to finalize the new deed protections. We added stipulations clauses that would prevent unauthorized transfers. He recommended a trust and referred me to an elder legal advocate who specialized in protecting women in my position. I see this more often than you'd believe, she said, handing me a pamphlet. Adult children weaponizing care against their own parents. You're not alone. That phrase stayed with me. I wasn't alone. I decided to do something small, quiet, but powerful. I invited 3 women from the neighborhood, widows mostly. One had been pressured to sell her husband's antique tools. Another had been tricked into co-signing a loan for her nephew. We met on my porch with lemonade and folding chairs. By the 3rd gathering, we were 7. By the 5th, we had a name. The Matriarch Circle. We weren't plotting revenge. Not exactly. We were comparing notes. And more importantly, we were refusing to vanish. That summer, I turned the guest room into a reading nook, bought a second-hand armchair, and stacked all my journals into baskets. I even framed an old photo of James as a toddler, still innocent, still soft. It hurt to look at it, but it also reminded me that I had loved him fully, with no conditions, and that mattered even if he never remembered. In August, a letter came in the mail. No return address, just my name. Inside was a note written in James's handwriting. I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I want you to know I've started therapy. And I'm no longer with Emily. She said she wanted power. I gave it to her. And she used it to hollow me out. You were right. I didn't understand the house. I only saw the equity, not the soul. If I ever earn the right, I'd like to visit again. I read it twice, folded it neatly, put it in the back of my favorite book. I didn't cry. I didn't reply. But I smiled. I was watering the garden that evening when the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of honeysuckle and old stories. The maple tree swayed gently, the one where we buried Max, our golden retriever, 20 years ago. I whispered a simple sentence under my breath. We're still here. And we were. I was. Fully. Fiercely. Finally. The porch had become my throne. Every morning, I'd sit with my tea quilt draped over my knees, the air cool and kind. I'd watch the neighborhood hum back to life, cars pulling out, children skipping to the school bus, wind stirring the hydrangeas. I once thought I'd never see bloom again, but I was still here. I was blooming too. The Matriarch Circle grew. Every week more women came. Some brought stories. Some brought casseroles. Some brought nothing but silence and eyes that had seen too much. They all brought truth. One woman, Louisa, had been evicted by her daughter-in-law after her son died. Another, named Ruth, had quietly handed over power of attorney to her niece, who used it to liquidate her retirement. We weren't rare. We were a pattern, a generation dismissed and devoured by the ones we raised. So we made a pact. Each of us would mentor one younger woman in the community, not to preach, to prepare, to pass on the truths no one had told us. My mentee was a young single mom named Talia. She worked at the grocery store and lived in a cramped apartment with her 2 kids. She'd been estranged from her own mother since she was 16. Why are you helping me? She asked the first time we met for coffee. I sipped my tea and said, "Because you remind me of someone I once loved too softly." That was all. She nodded. From then on, she came every Sunday afternoon. Together, we turned the backyard into a garden again. Talia's boys helped shovel soil. She picked the wildflowers. I taught her how to propagate cuttings. I gave her Max's old collar to hang in the apple tree. She didn't ask why, but I think she knew. There was healing in the dirt. There was purpose in the roots. And then, one afternoon in September, I saw James. He was standing at the edge of the driveway holding a small box. Just standing there, unshaven, gaunt. A man no longer under Emily's armor. He didn't move until I opened the door. "I don't want to come in," he said. "I just want to give you this." He set the box down. Inside, a photo of me and him at his high school graduation framed. A coffee mug from our favorite diner. A small card that read simply, "Thank you for raising me when no one else would." I didn't say a word. I didn't invite him in. But after he left, I brought the box inside and placed it on the bookshelf between To Kill a Mockingbird and The Velveteen Rabbit. 2 stories about innocence. 2 stories about justice. 2 stories that somehow still believed in redemption. Just like I wanted to. That night, I stood in the kitchen bathed in the golden light of sunset. I thought about the eviction notice, the betrayal, the folder, the lemon squares I baked even when they had broken me. And I whispered to the house, "We made it." The walls didn't answer, but they didn't creak anymore either. They had settled. Like me. Winter came slower that year. The leaves took their time letting go, as if the trees understood something about holding on too long. I walked the yard each morning with my scarf bundled high and my thoughts tucked deeper. There were no more letters from James. No visits. No closure. But I had stopped needing it. Talia's boys brought over snow globes they made in school. One had tiny glitter stars that stuck stubbornly to the plastic reindeer inside. "This one's for your living room," they insisted. I put it on the mantel right where James's childhood crafts used to be. That felt right. That felt enough. Our circle planned a gathering for the first snow. A small event. Or so we thought. Word had spread. More than 24 women showed up bundled in their coats. Some holding trays of cookies, others just showing up because someone finally saw them. We gathered in my living room, stories spilling like wine. One woman said, "My granddaughter called me a burden. I haven't spoken since," another whispered. "They changed the locks," said I was confused. None of them cried. They'd done that already. Now they wanted witnesses. So I stood. "My name is Margaret Holloway," I said for the first time aloud in front of them all. "And my grandson once handed me an eviction notice." Gasps. Not pity. Recognition. I went on. "But I'm still in my home. I found a lawyer. I found a circle. And most of all, I found myself again." Applause broke out. The slow kind. The kind that starts in the chest before it reaches the hands. When everyone left, Ruth pulled me aside. "You should write it all down," she said. "The whole story." "No," she smiled. "The parts only you remember." I knew what she meant. Not just the facts. The feelings. That night, I opened a fresh notebook. Page 1. This house was never just wood and nails. It was my heartbeat. And even when they tried to sell it, silence it, bury it under legal terms, I kept beating. I didn't know who I was writing for. Maybe Talia. Maybe her son someday. Maybe the women who'd never get the chance. But each word felt like a brick in the foundation I was now laying, not for walls, but for truth. Then something happened I hadn't expected. The county called. Apparently, a local news reporter heard about the matriarch circle through the legal center Daniel connected me to. They wanted to feature our story. Not just me. Us. The betrayed, the bruised, the bold. I hesitated, but then I said yes. Because maybe if one more woman saw our story and realized she wasn't alone, it would all be worth it. The morning the reporter came, I made coffee the way I used to when James was in high school. Dark, strong with a splash of cream, and just 1 sugar cube because that's how his father had liked it. It felt strange how muscle memory clings to things even long after love has left them. The reporter's name was Clara. Young, sharp, empathetic without trying to be. She wore a slate gray scarf and a press badge clipped awkwardly to a puffer jacket. When I opened the door, she extended her hand, but her eyes scanned the living room like she already understood something heavy had lived here. Your home smells like lemon and cedar, she said, stepping in. That's because I've baked through grief, I replied, and scrubbed away betrayal. She blinked, then smiled. I think we're going to have a powerful story. The interview started slow questions about our circle, the origins of the garden, the women we'd helped. But then Clara asked, "Why didn't you leave when they asked you to? Why not start over somewhere else?" I took a long breath. "Because I started over here," I said, pointing to the floor beneath us. "This is where my grandson took his first steps. This is where his mother handed me a suitcase and said, 'We're going, but he stays.' This is where I raised him. And this is where he tried to erase me." Clara lowered her camera. "That's the headline," she whispered. After she left, I sat in the kitchen, heart still racing. Talia knocked gently on the window and let herself in. Her boys trailed behind her, already arguing about who got the last muffin. I watched them, watched her wipe their noses and pour them juice. And I realized I had become something I never expected to be again. A mother figure? Later that week, Clara's story aired. It wasn't just local. It went viral, shared by women's groups, elder justice networks, even parenting forums. The headline was simple: she raised her grandson. Then he tried to erase her. I started receiving letters, some handwritten, some emailed. One woman from Arizona wrote, "Your story made me walk out of the nursing home I was dumped in." I took back my name. "Thank you." Another from Ohio said, "I didn't think I mattered anymore. Then I saw your quilt in the article photo." Quilt. I blinked. Yes. In the background of one of the pictures was the old patchwork I'd started during James's infant years. It had survived everything, just like me. Then one morning, I found a small white envelope on my doorstep. No return address. Inside, a single key and a note. I moved out. The condo was never mine to want. "I'm sorry." It was James's handwriting. I stared at it for a long time. Didn't cry. Didn't rage. Just placed it in a drawer with the eviction notice. Evidence of both ends of the pendulum. Proof that even when they swing away, they sometimes come back. Talia found me sitting on the porch that evening, the sky melting into mauve and indigo. "You okay?" she asked. I think I said softly, "I've finally taken my last breath of bitterness." She tilted her head. "And what's next?" I looked out at the yard where tulip bulbs waited patiently beneath the soil. "Spring," I whispered. Spring came sooner than expected. Tiny green tips pierced the soil where the tulip bulbs had slept through their silent winter. Birds returned to the yard like they had never left. And I felt like something inside me had finally thawed too. The article had changed everything. Not just for me, but for all of us. Our matriarch circle had doubled in size. We no longer fit in my living room. We moved meetings to the old community center where laughter echoed off the dusty gymnasium walls, and folding chairs became thrones for women who had once been told they were too much or too old. But something else changed too. James came back. Not to live, not to make excuses, but to speak. One quiet Sunday afternoon, Talia knocked on my door and said, "Margaret, your grandson's outside." My stomach sank like it had when I was first handed that eviction letter. I braced myself, walked to the door, and opened it slowly. There he stood, hair a little longer, face thinner, holding a folded paper bag like a peace offering. "Hi, Nana," he said. I didn't reply. He held out the bag. "Your lemon tea. I remember it helped your nerves." We sat outside, on opposite ends of the bench. The air was heavy with unsaid things. "I saw the article," he began. "I didn't think that I'd speak up." I finished. He looked down. "No, I didn't think anyone would care." That hit harder than any insult. I stirred my tea. "You were wrong," I said softly. "I know." He rubbed his eyes. "I don't expect forgiveness." "Good, because forgiveness isn't something you expect. It's something you earn." He nodded. "I sold your house because I thought I deserved it. I thought you were holding me back. I didn't realize you were holding me up." My chest tightened. "I've lost a lot this year," he continued. "But losing your trust, that was the worst." I wanted to say something profound. Instead, I said, Do you know how long I waited for you to say that? He looked at me, eyes red. Every night, I whispered. Every single night. He asked if he could visit again. Not to stay. Not to reclaim. Just to learn. To remember. I didn't say yes. But I didn't say no either. Instead, I said, bring a notebook. I'll teach you the recipe for the lemon cake you used to love. He smiled. And for the first time in a long while, I believed it was genuine. That night, I took out the eviction letter again, folded it neatly, slipped it into the same drawer as his apology note and the spare house key. I labeled it Evidence of Change, because sometimes it isn't about forgetting. It's about recording who we became after. At our next circle gathering, I told the story of James's visit. The women listened intently. When I finished, someone asked, so, did you forgive him? I looked at the quilt I had brought with me, now stretched across 2 tables. One square bore his name. One didn't. I don't know, I said, but I'm no longer sewing him out of the story. Sometimes that's the first stitch. April turned golden and soft. The house, once echoing with silence, now breathed again. Talia's boys ran across the lawn every afternoon, chasing soccer balls and shouting with that reckless joy only children seem to master. And I had begun writing letters again. Not emails, not texts, but real ink on paper letters. One to a woman named Joy who wrote from Texas after seeing the article. She was living in her car after her daughter took over her bank account. One to Mrs. Lowenstein, 82, who had no family but baked for the local firehouse every Friday to feel needed. And one finally to James. The letter wasn't long, but it was honest. Dear James, I am still here. I raised you because I believed in your future. I don't know if I was wrong, but I know I can no longer carry the pain of that question by myself. I'm not asking for you to fix anything. I'm not asking for more apologies. I'm asking for something deeper: growth. Come to the garden this Sunday. We're planting lilacs. Bring your hands and your humility. That will be enough. Nana. He came, not dressed up. No fanfare. Just jeans, an old shirt, and hands that were finally ready to touch the soil again. He didn't talk much. Neither did I. But side by side we dug holes for the lilac saplings. He asked which way to face them for best sunlight. I showed him. He nodded like a student, not a son. And for once I didn't correct him. Afterward, we sat on the back steps and watched the garden breathe. I've been going to therapy, he said softly. I nodded. My counselor said I have a legacy of abandonment to confront. That I was trying to run from being left by leaving you first. I felt the tear before I noticed it. You did leave me, he nodded. I know, but you're back. That night, I invited him to dinner. He ate quietly, like he was remembering how to be part of the rhythm. I gave him the corner seat, his grandfather's seat. He didn't comment, just folded his napkin like it was sacred. At the end of the meal, I brought out the quilt again. I added a square, I told him. He looked at it. Blue gingham. His old baby blanket. He touched it, then said, I remember this. I do too, I whispered. I remember everything. Later that week, Clara called. The story had been nominated for a regional journalism award. Would you come with me to the ceremony? She asked. I laughed. What would I even wear? She chuckled. Something with history. That's what makes you unforgettable. She wasn't wrong. The awards night arrived with more fanfare than I'd expected. Clara picked me up in a navy blue sedan, her camera slung across her shoulder like an old friend. I wore a silver-gray shawl my late husband had given me, and a dress that still smelled faintly of lavender sachets from my cedar chest. James offered to drive me, but I politely declined. I need to walk into this with my own 2 feet, I told him. And I did. The banquet hall glittered with polite laughter and clinking glassware. The moment I entered, people turned. They didn't see a fragile old woman. They saw the story. The grandmother who fought back. The woman who said no more silence. Clara beamed as she led me to our table. You're a star, she whispered. I wasn't, but for one night I allowed myself to feel seen. When they called her name, Clara squeezed my hand. I owe this to someone whose strength doesn't make headlines, she said at the podium, but whose resilience has lit a fire across the country. Margaret Reed. This story is yours as much as it is mine, she gestured to me. Applause filled the room. I stood slowly, heart thudding. I wasn't used to standing ovations. But this time I didn't shrink. I lifted my chin and gave a nod. After the ceremony, a woman approached me. "Mrs. Reed?" she said, her voice shaking. "My daughter hasn't spoken to me in 5 years. But after your story aired, she sent me a photo of us from her childhood, with a note that said, 'I want to come home.'" I took her hand. Talia once said stories were time machines. But that night I realized they're also bridges. When I returned home, the house felt warmer. James had left a note on the table. I walked by the garden. "The lilacs are growing. Thank you for planting something I didn't deserve to inherit." I placed the note next to the square I'd been sewing. A deep violet patch stitched with one phrase: "Roots can regrow." That weekend I hosted one last gathering in the yard. Talia brought her mother. Clara brought her editor. Women from 3 counties came, some on walkers, some carrying printed copies of the article like a talisman. James came too. He didn't speak much, but he listened. He helped set up chairs, poured lemonade, and when an elderly woman tripped, he rushed to help. Not because I asked him to, because he had finally remembered who he was raised to be. As the sun set, I stood before them all. "My name is Margaret Reed," I said, "and I was once evicted from my own story. But tonight in this garden I reclaim my roots." They clapped. Then we sat beneath the blooming lilacs together. A month passed. The lilacs grew thicker, lusher. Their scent drifted into the house, now curling into corners that had once known grief. I walked slower these days, but lighter. Something had shifted. Not just in James and me. For so long I'd defined myself by what I had given. Mother, grandmother, caregiver, provider, protector. But now I was simply Margaret. And that finally was enough. James came by every Sunday. Sometimes we didn't speak. He'd bring something small, a book, a roll of film from his new photography hobby, a bundle of herbs from the market. He always entered through the back gate like he used to when he was little, like he was coming home. One evening he stood on the porch as I watered the garden. "Nana," he said, "I got an offer to move out of state. It's a good job. But I don't want to go unless you're okay with it." I didn't flinch. "You should go," I told him. "Grow your life. You have roots now. You won't forget where you came from." He hesitated. "And you? Will you be all right?" I smiled. "I've finally remembered who I am. I'll be better than all right." Before he left, I gave him a small box. Inside was a square of the quilt. Not just any square, the first one I'd ever sewn. "Take it with you," I said, "so you always remember what it means to be held even when you don't deserve it." He hugged me like he did when he was 6. And for once, I let myself believe it was real. Now the house is quieter, but not hollow. I wake each morning, make coffee, and tend the lilacs. Sometimes letters arrive. From strangers. From women who say they saw my story and recognized themselves. Some write in anger, others in grief, most in gratitude. I answer each one, because if silence tried to erase me, my story will become a chorus. I have one last square to sew. It's different. It's made from an old shirt of my husband's, one of James's baby socks, a corner of the eviction letter, and a scrap of lilac fabric. I call it legacy. It doesn't mean wealth. It means survival with grace. So before you sit down and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Because stories like this, they remind us we are never truly forgotten. If you've made it here, then you know what this story really was. Not about eviction, not about betrayal, not even about revenge. It was about remembrance. The slow, quiet reckoning of what a woman gives and what she's owed in return. When James turned me out of my own home, it wasn't just bricks and mortar I lost. It was history, safety, my identity. But what he didn't realize is that older women, especially those who've raised generations, don't disappear. We reroot. We grow again in garden beds, in stitched fabric, in words passed from one to another. And sometimes, sometimes the same child who cast us aside finds their way back humbled, not by punishment, but by the legacy of love that refused to collapse. This story isn't unique. That's what breaks my heart. So many women are living their quiet wars in guest rooms they used to own, on porches they built, but were pushed from, holding the grief of abandonment in hands that once cradled the very people who forgot them. To them I say, You are not alone. Let the world hear your voice even if it trembles. Because sometimes the softest voice sows the loudest legacy.